The color is something I didn't want to let go of when I switched from painting to sculpture, which happened about 1959, so I've been at it for a while. But the other thing I was never that interested in was European sculpture that was polychrome, that is to say the parts painted. So I wanted to try and make the sculpture as much as possible out of a single piece of metal. No matter how many times it got cut apart, it had this kind of origin to it, rather than assemblage sculpture or collage sculpture, or more cubist sculpture. But the one thing that I always hung on to was the use of color. And I rely on getting an impulse about what the color should be, usually while we're building the piece. You know, like most Canadians, I started out as a landscape painter and in that kind of tradition. So the landscape still has a lot of bearing. Maybe the easiest explanation is to talk about the reliefs. They're based on photos that I take from my airplane of the landscape, mostly around where we live in Chester County and Lancaster County. And they go through an interesting kind of metamorphosis, I suppose. I use the photographs to make large charcoal drawings, which are basically the size that the reliefs end up being. And then I kind of tease out a linear pattern from the photos, and that becomes the basis of the reliefs. Then I plasma cut the shapes and then give them a light forming. I mean, they're not high relief, but that kind of subtle change of contour is based on the reality of what the locale is like. So in a way, they're landscape paintings, even though I think of them as abstract drawings, finally.
Robert's work, for me, is a delicious conundrum of complexity and simplicity at the same time. I look at it and it looks really simple, and then I go, wait a minute. And then I see how complex it is, and then while I'm looking at the complexity, I come back to, I go, wait a minute about the simplicity. And it keeps on doing that for me. And it provides me with a kind of pleasure that I think what it is that it makes, when I'm looking at it, it makes me alert. And then it makes me alerter, and alerter, and alerter. I think that's a word, I'm not sure.
The environment influences these pieces in a number of ways, and that's to some extent what led to the watercolors. The watercolors, including this simple study here, were a way for me to try and envisage where the work might go. And in many cases, since I spend my summers up in the Georgian Bay now, I often do watercolor studies of pieces of sculpture models I've built with a specific landscape background in behind it. And I like that relationship of the work to a particular environment.
So we're going to wrap up. Thank you, Bob. And it's just such a joy to have you here.
Well, good. And thank you, Vivian, for inviting me.